You're watching TVC Breakfast. On this segment, we're looking at the life of an adolescent and a young person in Nigeria and some of the things that they face, especially health-related issues, not necessarily social now, bringing it down, narrowing it down to the health challenges some of them face that could be a challenge to their attaining the level of productivity and capacity for each person. And in the studio, we have the Vice Chancellor of University of Medical Sciences, Ondo, Professor Adesegun Fetusi. He has been helping us to make sense of all of this. Professor, I was asking you earlier, you were trying to give us a background to comparing and looking at the life of what the adolescent now faces and so on from the family front.
So, like I said, the adolescent, when you start from the home situation has changed, the family situation has changed. The family connectivity, the family communication, the family processes that we used to have that became the bonding factor for the young person in many homes are no longer there. When you come to the school environment, you find in the school environment that the teachers' relationship and connection with the students has also changed. And you see a lot more violence happen in the school environment. When you take the larger environment, the media world has changed with a lot of social media interaction, with a lot of disconnection between young people and their immediate environment. And all that boils down to a couple of things for young people. Number one, it affects their understanding of issues and the kind of engagement in risky behavior. So you look at young persons, there's an increased risk of engagement in sex. And not just in sex, but even sex under the influence of drug. One other issue that we must talk about is the issue of mental health. The young people of this generation have far higher rate of mental burden, and we also know that there are a lot more suicidal attempts happening among young people. The issue of drug cut across those two and even beyond. A lot of what we see, even in schools, when you talk about people having gang rape, even people are caught, they're not just done physically. There are issues that are influenced a lot of times with the use of drug. And drug has become a big problem from primary school all throughout society. So you have issue of, like I said, mental health issue. You have sexual and reproductive issue. You have issue of violence increasing among young people. You have nutritional problems. Because again, when young people look at models, they want to be like the model. The young girls don't want to eat. So when you take all that together, what it tells us is that today we have a much higher burden of problem among younger people.
So they are wanting to be like models, and people and things they see on TV sometimes put pressure on them to become desperate.
It put pressure on them everywhere. Right. For example, even sexual habits, sexual engagements. So the media is a big part of it, particularly the social media. Social media is like a jungle. Everybody says what you want. Everybody does what. But what is missing is the presence of the adult to help make sense. If you're a young person, you see something on social media, and you can talk to somebody who's older and say, look, I saw this. What does this mean? Then you can get guided. So the problem is that the socialization process, the environment has changed so much that the young person has become more or less left on his own. And the society, the structure that help us to achieve socialization and stabilization had more or less been removed to a large extent. So, every young person, when you enter into adolescence, what happens is curiosity increases. All that are normal. To have higher sexual urge, it's normal. To have to be curious about life, it's normal. What happens is because you have people who help you navigate those things. You have parental support, you have elders that helps the older generation to be able to cope with those issues. But those missing links are one of the biggest challenges we have now.
In the middle of all this, Prof, now is the issue of the respect for their rights, and in this context of our conversation, we're talking about their reproductive health and mental rights. You've spoken about the burden the young people, adolescents, carry, especially under this present dispensation, so to speak, or this present generation. But help us to balance it out. They have rights, they have burdens. They also have responsibilities to the society.
So when you think about rights, young people have rights, and society have rights to young people. So when you think about their rights, for example, is You need to have a right to have education. You have right to access information. You have right to access health services. All that are what the duty bearers, the state, should provide for them. And that means that you also give them the opportunity to be able to speak their mind, because you can't shape young people's life for them without their involvement. And so those are all about the rights. But on the other hand, it's the responsibility. So the responsibility grows out of, one, understanding who you are, your potentials, and the opportunity you have to use it. If you don't have the opportunity to utilize your capacity, responsibility becomes difficult for you. So young people have a responsibility, one, again, to be law-abiding in society, for example, to be part of those who contribute to the development of society. They have responsibility to also maintain their life, to maintain health, to maintain level of responsibilities. All that are more or less balanced in a way when you put the right structure and the right processes in place. Without those, you can't talk about rights and responsibilities in balance. They're going to be out of balance. So when somebody argues that, look, it's my right, it's my right, it's my right, and yet doesn't have education, he's going to argue for rights that he doesn't know about. And you're talking about him being responsible, and he doesn't have the capacity, he has not built his competency. How is he going to be responsible? Responsible for what? So those are issues that we must look about, the structures, the processes that enables rights and responsibilities to come to a balance and for us to get the optimal development among young people.
All right. When we talk about adolescent or even youth, there's another slant when we talk about the female child or the girl child. Some people have said that their own case is a little more complicated or has to be cared more for because of certain peculiarities. Talk to us from the perspective of the adolescent female child.
Okay. So the adolescent female, we often talk about that more because most of the outcomes, the negative outcomes, happen among them. A young boy gets engaged in sex early, a young girl gets engaged in sex early. The boy doesn't carry the pregnancy. The girl carries the pregnancy. And the society we live in, even if something happens, the boy disappears. So the young girl bears the burden of more of the reproductive outcomes that are negative. That's not only about pregnancy. Even when it comes to sexually transmitted infections, because of the anatomical construction of the young girl, she has the vaginal area, for example, is much larger. If you have sex with somebody who has HIV, you are more likely to contact it just because of the anatomic construction. You retain the semen and sperm. So that exposes you more. And the fact that you are very young also means that the protective layer around the vagina is not as strong as older female. So germs can penetrate more. So all the negative outcomes for pregnancy, for sexually transmitted infections are more for the female. But in addition, when you think about things like rape and violence, men are raped less. It doesn't mean that it doesn't happen, but it's a bit more difficult. But young girls are far more vulnerable, and because the society also have not given them enough voice. This society where young girls young boys seem to be prized and appreciated more, and they have more freedom. So the young girl is socially disadvantaged to even speak her voice and to even be educated. In many parts of this country, you find that many girls are not as educated as young boys. So all that culminates in the young girl having higher vulnerability, both biologically, socially, and physically. And the society does not protect her as much as it ought to do. But let me say that even though we say that young girls need to be protected, on the other side, one of the challenges we might be facing is that while you are thinking about young girls, if you don't think about young boys at the same time, you are going to have a problem. Because the girl that you educate and the boy that you don't educate will come back
will find
to
themselves
be
in
a
the
problem
society.
to the girl that you're educating. So
right.
When we talk about young girls, we must take it as a composite whole. To protect the girl, you must work with the boys. And you must work on the boys. You must work with the men. Even though at the end of the day, the girl is in the middle of it all. If you don't address the boys, the men, you won't protect the girl adequately.